is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories.
I said I would do whatever it takes. I have done, and I will do so.
Britain's Finance Minister unveils his plan to get the UK economy back on its feet after the pandemic.
Hungary's Fidesz party is to leave the European Parliament's centre-right group amid a row over democratic values.
Scientists in Belgium recommend the AstraZeneca vaccine for over 55s, reversing a recommendation by the country's regulator a month ago.
Aston Martin announces its return to Formula One. Will it help turn the corner on its collapse in sales?
Vaccine, 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 vaccine. I'm begging of you, please don't hesitate.
And country music legend Dolly Parton takes a dose of her own medicine.
The UK's finance minister has outlined what many believe is the most critical budget in a generation. The pandemic has caused havoc with the government's finances, with borrowing set to top $560 billion. In the House of Commons, Rishi Sunak set out how he plans to plug that huge hole, whilst at the same time supporting struggling businesses. Britain's job support scheme, or furlough as it's called, will be extended until the end of September. This means the government will continue paying the wages of millions of people. Corporation tax will be raised from 19% to 25% in 2023. And there'll be new grants for hard-hit sectors like retail and hospitality worth around $7 billion. Well, our correspondent Naweed Jabarkil has been following the day's events in Westminster. Naweed, who are the winners and who are the losers here?
Well, Jamie, today was all about the Chancellor trying to instill confidence in an economy that's going through its worst crisis in more than 300 years. GDP fell almost 10% here last year. More than 700,000 people have lost their jobs since the pandemic first struck in the UK. Rishi Sunak, the headline figure that's come out of this, the headline policy, if you like, is the extension of the furlough scheme until September. That's going to protect millions of jobs, with the government offering to pay up to 80% of workers' wages. There's also the high street help for Britain's high street, $7 billion almost in grants to help the hospitality and retail and leisure sectors. That's going to be important because lots of businesses have had to close for good. And then there's also $2.3 billion of help for the UK's vaccination programme, already one of the world's leading programmes in terms of rollout. But really, I think this was about the finance minister standing up and saying he's going to do all he can to support businesses in this country. But if you look at where this goes, still a lot of challenges. Public borrowing soaring past $380 billion since the pandemic first struck. We also got a figure of just how much this is costing the UK economy. $500 billion. Rishi Sunak says the government is going to pump into COVID measures this year and next. And then there are other concerns around Brexit, of course, affecting small and medium-sized enterprises in particular. And even though the vaccine progress has been made in recent months, more than 20.5 million people vaccinated in the UK, there's still a lot of uncertainty around COVID-19 and these new mutations, which is going to affect the economic recovery moving forward. The key question is who pays for all of this? At the moment, the finance minister resisting calls for income tax and VAT, the sorts of taxes which affect ordinary people. He's resisting calls to raise those, but he did say that businesses will have to start paying more taxes. Have a listen.
In 2023, the rate of corporation tax paid on company profits will increase to 25%. Even after this change, the United Kingdom will still have the lowest corporation tax rate in the G7, lower than the United States, Canada, Italy, Japan, Germany and France.
Naweed, so how has his speech gone down? What's the reaction been?
Well, on the whole, Jamie, it's been pretty positive. The market's reacting well, and most people reacting, particularly businesses and workers, will be breathing a sigh of relief, I think, at the fact that many jobs will be protected through this furlough scheme. But there have been some people who aren't too happy about it. The environmental lobby, for example, saying it doesn't go far enough, particularly in a year where the UK claims it's going to put climate change right at the heart of its policy, hosting the COP26 climate conference later this year. Fuel duty, for example, has been frozen, which means the cost of driving cars won't go up too much. There's also concern among the aviation sector. Travel and tourism contributes 10% almost of the UK's GDP. There wasn't too much in this budget today to help the aviation sector. But more broadly, the rest of the region will be looking. The UK, even though it's suffering at the moment economically, it is still a big regional economy, still a big global economy, and that furlough scheme extension will be really important. In France, this furlough scheme from this month is going to start to be winded down. In Spain, they've recently extended it to May, and Italy's winding its own scheme down as well. So I think the fact that the UK says it's going to push it all the way until September, that could force workers elsewhere in Europe to start demanding similar protection, particularly as the virus rages on. Jamie.
Luigi Barkle in a rather rainy Westminster. Thank you very much.
Well, let's stick with the UK budget and bring in Fiona Cincotta, who's an analyst at City Index in London. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Now, look, Britain suffered one of the worst COVID outbreaks and really the worst economic performance of any major economy last year. So there are high hopes of economic recovery by this summer. Will this high tax, high spend budget do the trick?
I think it will definitely help. It's a very supportive budget, and that is what the UK does need in order to help it through this sort of hopefully final stage of the pandemic, the lockdown, into the reopening. The support is still desperately needed. As far as growth is concerned, there is some good news. We do expect the UK economy to return to pre-pandemic growth quicker than previously expected, so about 6 months quicker by mid-next year. Also, as far as unemployment is concerned, there is some good news there. This, with the furlough scheme, also the extension of the furlough scheme, it means that unemployment is only expected to peak at 6.5%, which is lower than what it was expected to peak at previously. So there is some good news coming from this, and we do think that this sort of level of support from the Chancellor is going to help the recovery.
That's the UK. Let's talk about what this means more broadly, because you mentioned furlough, and our correspondent Louise was talking about the job retention schemes in other countries around Europe. So how does this budget maybe set the tone? I mean, what might other countries make of it and indeed take from it?
As far as furlough, again, this has been a really important theme across the world and across Europe particularly, is that idea of protecting jobs and furloughing employees. So that's going to be a key theme across different countries. In Germany, for example, they've actually got a much bigger furlough scheme than we do have here in the UK, even with the extension. And again, in France, theirs was more generous than ours is here. The cap here is smaller than it is in those countries. So, and also they do have, for example, in Germany, they're looking to extend it further. So although this is generous and it is very supportive, I do think it is just slightly lacking, for example, compared to Germany.
And in terms of what other countries might take from this, it's, after all, the first major economy to set out its financial recovery plan.
That's right. And I think employment is going to be a key theme across the region. So we're going to see the Eurozone really focusing on employment, keeping jobs as much as possible. Also, as we said, corporation tax. Now, this is going to be a really interesting one because the UK has or has set out the timetable to increase corporation tax. But we do have quite a low corporation tax here in the UK compared to other G7 countries and also other countries within Europe. So I think it's going to be a very, very difficult balance that countries are going to have to find between protecting jobs, protecting the economy, but also plugging those big holes that are appearing in public finances.
And speaking of those big holes, of course, you have to think about who's ultimately going to pay for it. I mean, do you think there's a general acceptance now that it's going to be businesses that are going to foot the bill? Or, as some commentators have been saying, is the secret to recovery lying in setting entrepreneurs free?
It's a very, very good and interesting policy, and the idea to look at that is definitely going to be innovative moving forward. But as far as taxing businesses is concerned, that is something that's going to have to happen. Also, we've heard that the threshold for income tax here in the UK will also be frozen. Now, that's not exactly a tax hike, but it is in some sort of sneaky way. So, I mean, it's definitely going to have to see tax hikes in order to pay for this, because it does need to get paid for.
Fiona Cincotta at City Index, thank you very much. Well, let's look at what financial markets made of Rishi Sunak's UK budget, much of which had been leaked beforehand, so they knew what was coming. The FTSE 100 jumped by nearly 2% in early trade, but settled down, as you can see, later on during the day as investors digested all the details. But the story is really in the individual sectors. House builders, now they got a boost on the news of the extended stamp duty holiday and new mortgage guarantees. Let's look at Barratt here. They're in the FTSE 100. Barratt Developments, the biggest gainer, up more than 5%. Now, the economy opening up helps struggling sectors on the high street, like hospitality. Whitbread, the UK's largest operator of hotels and restaurants, they were up over 5% as well. And travel, now that's another sector that's going to benefit from this budget, as they're big recipients of the UK's furlough scheme, job retention scheme. Now that's being extended. That's great news for British Airways owner IAG. Look, they jumped more than 5%.
The car-making giant Stellantis has reported better than expected results for 2020. It experienced record sales last quarter, and it will now start a planned $7 billion cost-cutting program. The company was created by the merger of Peugeot maker PSA and Fiat Chrysler, which was completed last month. It's now the world's fourth largest car maker. South Korea's Samsung Electronics, which is looking to build a $17 billion chip factory in the United States, is now considering 4 sites. In addition to Austin, Texas, 2 locations in Arizona and 1 in New York are in the running. The company says the plant could create 1,800 jobs. The German Employers Association is criticizing a law that fines companies which abuse labor rights in their global supply chains. Under the rules, trade unions will be able to bring lawsuits against German companies on behalf of foreign workers. The Employers Association says many firms will have no choice but to withdraw from countries with problematic human rights records. Now, if you fancy a free trip to the moon and get in touch with Yasaku Maezawa, the Japanese billionaire is searching for 8 people to join him aboard Elon Musk's SpaceX. The week-long voyage is scheduled for takeoff in 2023 and will be the first private passenger space trip. 2 recent prototypes of the craft have exploded during testing.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Aston Martin's new boss will be live on this show, telling us why he wants to race in Formula One.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole,
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for the Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. A quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, cgtn.com and the CGTN app. Hungary's ruling Fidesz party has quit the centre-right voting bloc in the European Parliament. It's the latest development in a long-running row between the EU and the Prime Minister Viktor Orban's party over democratic backsliding and the rule of law in Hungary. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Julia Chapman, who's been following the story for us in Budapest. Julia, what's this all about?
At the heart of this, as you say, is this rift in the European People's Party, the centre-right alliance of the European Parliament. And that rift has been deepening over the years between certain elements of that party from different parties around Europe who accuse Hungary's Fidesz of backsliding on democratic norms, of chipping away at the independence of the judiciary, of universities and of the media. And of course, they've got very differing stances on migration as well. So these issues have really been building over time. And 2 years ago, the EPP voted to suspend Fidesz from the overall group, but its members of European Parliament remained part of the EPP in the European Parliament. That's no longer the case after today. Prime Minister Viktor Orban announced that the Fidesz MEPs would no longer be part of the EPP parliamentary group, and that came after this vote that took place today that was aimed at simplifying the process to suspend or even expel members of the EPP.
And did Fidesz decide to jump before they were pushed?
They did in a way, but they can still be pushed because although the MEPs have left the parliamentary group and will no longer be part of that bloc, Fidesz is still only suspended from the overall EPP group. And we understand now from the EPP that they will still begin the expulsion procedure to formally remove Fidesz from the overall group. So there are still processes ahead. It's not a final decision, and we don't yet know whether Fidesz itself could choose to also remove itself from the overall group as well as the parliamentary body.
And what are the implications for Hungary and its ongoing row with EU institutions? Where does this go next?
Well, this was certainly a move deliberately aimed at sending a message to the Hungarian government that it was unacceptable to be shifting further to the right as the EPP sees it. And of course, if the EPP does choose to formally withdraw ties from Fidesz, to cut them loose from the overall EPP, then it's possible that Fidesz could end up moving to a coalition of other further right parties in the European Parliament, which of course could affect its role in the EU overall going forward.
Julia Chapman in Budapest. Thank you very much.
Belgium says the AstraZeneca vaccine can be given to people over 55. It reverses a recommendation by the country's regulator a month ago, which was based on insufficient trial data. It comes a day after France approved the drug for over 65s. Let's talk to our correspondent, Tony Waterman, who's in Brussels. Tony, this is quite the U-turn, isn't it?
Yeah, and very much hot on the heels of that French decision, which you just mentioned, but not terribly surprising, given that there was this new large-scale study out of the UK that showed that the AstraZeneca jab is, in fact, rather effective in older people. This was cited as the main reason why a number of European countries, including Belgium, France, Germany, Poland, and Italy, said that they were going to hold off on recommending its use in older groups until that data was available. But this, the hope here is that this is going to help jumpstart the country's vaccination program. The largest vaccination center in the country, which is in Belgium, it's located right near the famed Atomium. It has the capacity to inject 1,000 people a day, but it's been doing a tiny fraction of that. Just 3,000 doses have been delivered over the past 3 weeks. So there is hope now that by bringing this vaccine back online for these older age groups, the most vulnerable in society, that the inoculation program can really take off.
After a month on the vaccine non grata list for over 55s, the AstraZeneca jab is now back on the menu in Belgium. The country's health council reversing its recommendation that the shot not be used in people over 55, citing new, large-scale studies out of the UK showing strong efficacy in older age groups.
Vaccination with a dose of Pfizer or a dose of AstraZeneca has been associated with a significant reduction in symptomatic cases of COVID-19 in the elderly, along with better protection against serious illness.
The reversal comes amid a vaccine shortfall, which has dampened Belgium's immunization efforts. Vaccine centers like this one in Brussels have been injecting at half capacity for weeks, while the vast majority of the country's 300,000 AstraZeneca doses sit untouched in refrigerators. Officials hope this reversal can kickstart inoculations. After weeks of negative headlines, some in Belgium have turned down the jab, but many say they don't care what vaccine they get, as long as they get one.
I'm 65 and I feel that I'm on the more vulnerable side, so any vaccine I think would be fine for me.
I trust that if they're qualified, I think they're good to go, yes.
We have to trust our governments, our health authorities. They are probably, and believe that they are doing the best for us.
Experts say Belgium needs to be tactical in its approach, focusing on the most vulnerable.
You could cut your mortality rate by 95% with 2 million doses. That's the reality. That's how these numbers work. And I know that health authorities aren't actually saying this to people, but that's the reality.
Once the elderly population is protected, government officials say lockdown measures can be lifted at a much quicker pace.
So, Tony, we've had France, Belgium. So who's going to be next? Poland, Sweden, Italy?
I'd put your money on Germany, perhaps, because the health minister there, Jens Spahn, said earlier this morning that he expects there to be a decision on a reversal of the AstraZeneca jab in the coming days. He said that it was very, very good for people over 65. So we're expecting that there'll be a reversal there. But the pressure is really starting to mount now because a lot of these countries, Italy, Germany, they're struggling with raging infection numbers. You have parts of the German border which have been shut down. You have travel restrictions in place. The government is considering extending its lockdown for an additional 3 weeks. So the urgency in getting these vaccinations out is becoming even more apparent. The challenge now for places like France and Germany are going to be convincing people to get this vaccine. Vaccine skepticism was already very high in France, and then it wasn't helped by the fact that the president, Emmanuel Macron, said that the AstraZeneca jab was quasi-ineffective in people of older age groups. So it's going to be a challenge to convince people to now get this jab. But if they can, and the AstraZeneca jab, of course, much easier to handle than, say, the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, it could really accelerate the process going forward.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you for the update.
And let's just stay with vaccines because South Korea is investigating the deaths of 2 people, both with pre-existing conditions, who died after receiving the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. The country's disease control agency says 2 nursing home patients died after being given the vaccine. The agency has not yet confirmed the symptoms were caused by the vaccine.
Dutch police say an explosion at a COVID-19 test centre appears to have been an intentional act. Officers say a metal cylinder left outside the building, 60 kilometres north of Amsterdam, exploded before the site was open for the day. The incident comes after another testing centre was burned down during violent riots across the Netherlands against a coronavirus curfew.
China's biggest political gathering of the year is about to begin. More than 5,000 lawmakers and political advisers have arrived in the Chinese capital to chart the country's roadmap for the coming year. It's called 2 sessions, and as the name suggests, there are 2 parts to it. The National People's Congress, or MPC, is the country's top legislature and passes new laws and approves budgets. With almost 3,000 members, it is the world's largest lawmaking body. And then there's the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC, which is an advisory body. Its membership is a lot more diverse and includes business people, artists and sports stars. It has more than 2,000 members and can advise politicians, but doesn't have any legislative power. The two sessions have been held annually every March in Beijing since 1985. It's a major event in China, but the rest of the world usually keeps a close eye on it too. With China as the world's second largest economy, the unveiling of economic results and targets reverberate worldwide. And then, of course, there's the COVID-19 pandemic, which is likely to feature heavily again this year, as well as climate change, with China set to host the United Nations Biodiversity Conference in May.
Ahead of the two sessions, the CPPCC has set out its agenda. Spokesperson Guo Mei-min says the meeting will be shortened to reduce coronavirus risks, and many events will be held online. Delegates have submitted nearly 6,000 proposals concerning issues like poverty, education and food safety, China's development plan for the next 5 years, and COVID-19 vaccinations will be high on the agenda.
By the end of February, China had administered over 52 million doses. China has strictly carried out high technical standards while quickly producing its vaccines, meeting WHO standards. By the end of February, China had provided vaccine assistance to 69 countries and 2 international organizations. China's international vaccine cooperation has nothing to do with diplomacy, but is an example of the concept of building a community of shared future.
Well, China was the only major economy to report growth for 2020, but a top Chinese economist and CPPCC member says it's not yet out of the woods, especially regarding the country's low-income groups. CGTN Sunye reports.
Chinese economy hit bottom the first quarter of 2020 and has since bounced back big time. But economist Wang Yiming is not entirely relieved this spring, even as he anticipates Chinese economy to deliver even more uplifting news in the first months of 2021.
The first and second quarter stats will be good, but I also believe companies, especially smaller ones, will say they're not faring that well. We have to understand projected growth now largely comes from a very low baseline for 2020. Good macroeconomic policies should in no way slip just because the figures come out encouraging.
Wang says he's worried about China's lower income groups, many of whom are essential workers in the service industry. He proposed widespread injury insurance for gig workers like couriers during last year's two sessions, and Chinese President Xi Jinping had responded to it. This year, Wang is again handing in proposals for those in the lower income bracket.
A telling thing for me last year was seeing saving rates way up. For lower income groups, it means they're taking precautions against future risks and not spending as much. I hope to find ways to help them get better paid and for them to be happy to consume.
He says the focus on ramping up consumption was not his alone, as China now turns to become more reliant on domestic demand. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, not quite last orders. Britain's finance minister throws pubs a budgetary lifeline.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first two epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, making a last clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas. Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome! We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Britain's finance minister unveils his plan to get the UK economy back on its feet after the pandemic.
Hungary's Fidesz party is to leave the European Parliament centre-right group amid a row over democratic values.
And the car maker Aston Martin announces it's returning to Formula One, but will it help turn the corner on its collapse in sales? An investigation into war crimes in the Palestinian territories has been launched by the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor. The actions of both sides in the conflict will be examined. Let's talk to our correspondent Stephanie Freed, who joins us live from Tel Aviv. Stephanie, why now? What's behind this decision?
Well, you're asking Jamie about why now. First of all, it's important to understand that looking into all of the allegations, that's a process that's taken 5 years. However, it's the same thing that the Israeli officials, who are highly, highly critical of this decision, they're also speculating and looking into the why now. And what they're coming up with on this end is that back in June 2020, then U.S. President Donald Trump issued sanctions against ICC prosecutors and against the chief prosecutor, Bensouda herself, stripping her of her visa, saying, if you investigate, if the prosecutors investigate U.S. actions or ally actions implying Israel, then you're going to look at further sanctions and you're going to look at the implications of that. So that happened back in June. As we know, U.S. President Donald Trump is no longer the U.S. president. There's been a change of administration. And so that's being attributed to the timing of now, as well as Bensouda leaves office in a few months before she leaves office, possibly. A lot of speculation around that. Again, these were probes that were happening for 5 years into various different activities, Israel activities, 2014 incursion into Gaza, Israel's activities along the Gaza separation fence during protests, sniper activities there, Israel's settlement expansion, and on and on. As well, the International Court is looking at Hamas activities in terms of along the same lines. That's not to be forgotten. So that would explain more or less, or that's the speculation around the timing for right now. There's a storm in Israel over that decision and what's going to happen going forward. Of course, the implications are that Israeli officers, including the current defense minister, Benny Gantz, Israeli officers, higher-ranking soldiers, political officials, in the wake of a probe or an investigation, they could fly abroad, they could land in Europe, and they could be arrested.
Very briefly, what reaction from the Israelis and the Palestinians?
Well, as I was saying, a storm on the Israeli side. Israel's prime minister calling it anti-Semitic. Israel's speaker of the parliament also calling it an anti-Semitic move. Israel's president saying it's outrageous, that it won't be accepted. On the Palestinian side, the Palestinian Authority, the officials there are saying this is a victory. They're very happy. And then one leading Israel human rights organization is saying it's about time. They're saying Israel needs to be held accountable for what they say are ongoing crimes. Jamie.
Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv, thank you very much.
At least 18 people have been killed in Myanmar after security forces opened fire on protests against military rule, a day after the international community called for restraint. Mass demonstrations began last month against the military takeover that ousted the democratically elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi. Gao Jiayi is in Yangon.
Multiple reports from the social media said police used live ammunition as well as tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the protesters in many cities. In Mandalay, a 19-year-old female protester was shot in the neck and another man was shot in the chest, both dead on the spot. Another man also died from the gunshots. In Minyan, a small town in the center of the country, a 14-year-old protester also reportedly died after being shot in the head, and at least a dozen protesters were wounded by gunshots. 5 others were shot dead in a crackdown by the police and soldiers on an anti-military protest in Mongyuma City in Sigai region. There was also a crackdown in North Oklapa, the northern township of Yangon. According to the local doctor, there were at least 4 people killed by gunshots and 40 were injured and taken to the emergency. According to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners Monitoring Group, more than 1,200 people, including 34 journalists, have been arrested since February the 1st. 15 so far been released, including a Chinese reporter with 3 rubber bullets, once in the chest. The latest violence comes after the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, failed to agree a response to the situation in a virtual foreign ministers meeting on Tuesday. Gao Jiayi for CGTN in Yangon.
Germany's Domestic Security Service has declared the AfD, the Alternative for Germany party, a so-called suspected case of far-right extremism. It's reportedly been placed under surveillance for posing a threat to democracy. The move comes after a 2-year investigation into the far-right group, which is currently the largest opposition political party in parliament. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the killing of 3 women working for a local radio and TV station in Afghanistan. The 3 were killed in 2 separate attacks after they left work on Tuesday. Islamic State said the women were targeted because they worked for one of the media stations loyal to the Afghan government. Protests have erupted across Lebanon after the country's currency hit a record low against the dollar. In Beirut, demonstrators blocked the city's main highway. The crash in the Lebanese pound has resulted in a sharp increase in prices. It's also meant delays to fuel shipments, which has led to extended power cuts. The Tokyo Olympic Games Organising Committee is to add 12 new female directors to its executive board. The move comes after President Yoshiro Mori was forced to quit for making sexist remarks. His female replacement says she wants women to make up 40% of the board members. A 15th century Chinese bowl that's expected to fetch nearly $500,000 is about to go under the hammer at Sotheby's auction house in London. It's quite a jump from the price of $35 the seller originally paid at a yard sale in the United States. The rare bowl dates back to the Ming Dynasty. Publishers of the US children's books by Dr. Seuss have announced 6 of the 40 titles will no longer be published because they portray people in ways that are wrong. Concerns have been growing for years over the racial imagery in some of the books, which are hugely popular in the US.
President Joe Biden says the country is on track to have enough COVID-19 vaccines for all adults by the end of May. Biden is also confident he'll meet his goal of delivering 100 million vaccine doses in his first 100 days in office. With 3 different vaccines now approved for use in the United States, might Biden actually keep his promise? Well, let's ask our correspondent Giles Gibson, who's in Washington, for us. Giles, Biden seems pretty confident in his promise.
Yeah, Jamie, and a lot of that confidence is stemming from this newly approved Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which got its emergency use authorization from US regulators just over the weekend a few days ago. What the Biden administration has done here is really broker this partnership between these two pharmaceutical giants, between Johnson & Johnson, who came up with this vaccine, and also Merck, who are now promising to help Johnson & Johnson to ramp up production. They're actually going to be converting a couple of facilities to help Johnson & Johnson to do that. What all of this means is that between the new Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, those are the three approved vaccines in this country, that Joe Biden says that there will now be enough doses for every single American adult by the end of May here in the United States. Jamie, it is worth noting that there was a lot of caution underlying that confidence from President Biden when he made that speech. He was actually asked by a reporter when he thinks things will get back to normal here in the United States, and he said maybe by this time next year.
Giles, there is one fly in the ointment on this progress. Texas and Mississippi have decided to drop coronavirus restrictions. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, has announced that they're going to be lifting the mask mandate that's been in place for quite a while now in the state, and that all sorts of businesses will be able to reopen 100% from the 10th of March onwards. Jamie, I actually reported in Texas over the course of their winter surge, and I can tell you that there wasn't really the same sort of widespread mask wearing that we see out on the streets of Washington, D.C. or New York City, but people were forced to wear their masks when they're inside, stores and restaurants and things like that. We've also had similar moves announced by the governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, saying in a tweet, "Our hospitalizations and case numbers have plummeted and the vaccine is being rapidly distributed. It is time." The problem is that just a couple of days ago, the director of the Centers for Disease and Control Prevention, the CDC, actually said that it is not the time to relax some of these safeguards like mask mandates, because there's a lot of concern about the recent decline in cases sort of leveling off at around 65,000 new cases per day. And like many countries, there's also a lot of concern about these new variants of the virus that are currently circulating.
Giles Gibson in Washington, thank you very much.
Well, let's bring you some more on the latest budget in the UK. They've announced the Community Ownership Fund as part of it. It's a $209 million aid package for the country's pubs and other community-based venues. And the money may be used to match funds already raised by communities to save places like much-loved pubs. Well, let's talk to Tom Stainer. He's the CEO of CAMRA, which is the Campaign for Real Ale. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Now you've had a chance to soak up the details of the budget. What do you make of it? Are you crying into your beer?
I think there's many reasons to welcome the budget. We could go into lots of detail about the different things that are announced, but I think in particular the community pub buyout grants which they're giving are a real lifeline to save very valued community locals and for people who enjoy them to actually play a part in running the pubs near them.
Now, do you think that this government aid that's been earmarked for local communities, is it going to save struggling pubs?
I think undoubtedly it will. One of the biggest obstacles to communities being able to buy their pubs when they're under threat is just raising, in some cases, the hundreds of thousands of pounds that they require. So anything which can help them get over that obstacle is going to make it easier. It's going to make it easier to motivate local people. And we'd really hope that it's going to be a lifeline for these pubs. So you hope it's going to be a lifeline. But let's face it, pubs were calling last orders well before the pandemic. Not all of them, but it's an industry that has been stretched. We're more of us are drinking at home now with cheap supermarket deals. There's drink driving legislation, things like that. Also, the millennials, the young people have this sort of health kick, and they're not drinking much at all. So, is there a future? Do you think? Has the pandemic contributed to the death sentence for pubs? I think, sadly, you're absolutely right on all those points that made it very difficult for pubs, even pre-COVID, which is why it's been really important why we've campaigned for the Chancellor to give the grants and support to pubs to ensure that when they can reopen, they can recover. I think absolutely there's a future for pubs. They're hearts of communities, they're places for people to gather, they help combat loneliness, they bring communities together. And I think, if they're given the opportunity, if they're given the right environment to thrive in, and if communities are given the opportunity to buy their pubs and run them the way that they want to, many, many pubs do have and will have a future.
And what about beer makers? Many of your membership, they don't necessarily need pubs because they're looking at other more imaginative ways to reach their customers. Or, on the other hand, are they going to go the way of candlestick makers and fishmongers to an extent and sort of be consigned to their history books?
I think certainly that those great independent breweries, which you see not just in the UK but across the world, are really coming under pressure from the huge international giants. They're finding it very difficult to get access to market. And one of the great things that pubs offer is a brilliant access to market for local breweries. So, pubs surviving and being viable is important to breweries as well. And again, it's why we've campaigned for the right support for breweries, the right support for the independent brewery sector, the right market access, and just giving everyone a level playing field where we can all go into great pubs and enjoy great beers.
John Stainer, CEO of the Campaign for Real Ale. Pleasure having you on. Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, James Bond's company car heads for Formula One. Will it help Aston Martin escape some pretty awful results?
The sooner we are going to get back to being normal. So I just want to say to all of you,
and country music legend Dolly Parton urges Americans to get the jab.
get out there and get shot.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
NPC and CPPCC, China's biggest annual political gathering of lawmakers and political advisors. As the world's second largest economy recovers from the pandemic, it chalks out plans for the coming year and beyond. With new proposals, laws, and targets, CGTN brings you unmatched coverage of the meetings that matter. Exclusive interviews, people's voices, in-depth analysis, and the impact on the rest of the world. China's 2 sessions begins March 4th. Live and exclusive on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. One of the world's most famous car brands is about to make a return to Formula One. Having last graced the Formula One circuit over half a century ago, Aston Martin is back and raring to go, with 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel accompanying the up-and-coming driver Lance Stroll. They're aiming to back up style with substance. Well, I'm delighted to say his dad joins us. Lawrence Stroll is the boss of the company. He owns it, the chairman of both Aston Martin and the Aston Martin Cognizant Formula One racing team. A very warm welcome to the show. So the return to Formula One for the first time in a generation. Why is the obvious question.
Thank you for having me. Firstly, the answer to that question is
part of the heritage of Aston Martin, what's in the DNA of Aston Martin, when the company was created, was all about its racing history and its racing heritage, and it was bringing to life race cars onto the road. This is now returning to the DNA of the company. You know, we're building the greatest British iconic premier luxury brand in the world, and a very big part of that is through our racing heritage and returning to Formula One, the pinnacle of racing. Gives us the technology to bring down into our road cars, which is critically important, and also embraces 2.3 billion fans that watch the race on an annual basis.
And number one son's in the driving seat.
Yes, he earned that last year by taking pole in Turkey, several podiums. Had a bit of bad luck being pushed off the track a few times in a blown tire, but he earned his way into it. So it'll be a great combination of young talent and a veteran experience with Sebastian. They hopefully will push each other along very well.
Everyone loves Aston Martin around the world, James Bond's favourite company car, but of course, off the movies, it's no stranger to financial trouble in its rear-view mirror. I think the company's gone bankrupt 6 or 7 times. Does the road ahead look any different?
The road ahead is dramatically different. So I became executive chairman and majority shareholder at the end of April last year. And as you rightfully point out, what's in the rearview mirror is in the rearview mirror. As we demonstrated, the first quarter under my management that we could make a difference was the fourth quarter of this year, which we showed a positive EBITDA of £47 million. We also have a very clear roadmap and strategy of introduction of new models, which commenced with the DBX, which is a critically acclaimed great success in the luxury SUV sector. Our order book going forward is ahead of our projections for both DBX and for our traditional sports car range. And we have a full lineup of mid-engines, which technology coming out of our Formula One car to come on to our showroom floors in the next 2.5 years. So there's a clear roadmap with a very big strategy behind it. Part of that is with Formula One as a marketing platform to push the brand forward through technology and innovation.
Now, you say you want to turn Aston Martin into a British Ferrari, and I know that you're a fanatical collector of Ferraris. What do you mean when you say you want to turn Aston into Ferrari?
I need to correct you. It was not me who said I want to turn Aston into a Ferrari. It was a BBC reporter who asked me a couple of days ago if I was trying to turn Aston into a British Ferrari. And my response to him, which will be the same to you, we have our own plan. Aston Martin is Aston Martin. We have a 108-year history. We are going to be building 10,000 cars to £2 billion revenue and 500 million EBITDA within the next 4 years. We make the most beautiful cars. We will have the technology to match that beauty, and we have a Formula One team to market. So Ferrari does what Ferrari does. We have our own plan, and I really don't look over their shoulder, and I don't think they're looking over mine.
The results for most car companies over the last 18 months have been pretty ugly, whether you're running Mercedes or Aston Martin or whatever. I want to ask you, and I appreciate you haven't been in charge very long, but just how bad has the pandemic been for Aston?
Listen, it was no worse for us than it was for, as you rightly point out, any other automotive manufacturer. Actually, maybe circumstances a little more favorable for us. We had a bit of an inventory issue. Too many cars were made through 2018, and we closed the factory due to pandemic, which gave an opportunity for those inventories to happily be cleared through channels, which are I can happily report now complete as of this quarter. So we clearly missed the gross margin. We closed for several months. So it was painful, but not any more painful than any of our competitors had to experience, sadly.
Governments around the world are motoring towards a world of no emissions and electric cars. I wonder, where does a manufacturer of historically thirsty gas guzzlers like Aston sit in this new world, in this new landscape?
We are ahead of our competition in that respect. We will have 2 full electric vehicles, a sports car and an SUV, by 2025, which I believe significantly ahead of our competition. In addition, we're introducing electrification to our units in sports cars. Formula One already has the lowest carbon footprint combustion engine in the world, with an electric component to it. We will be taking that similar technology into our mid-engine programs. So we're well ahead of the curve. We'll have 2 proper full EV vehicles by 25 and electrification introduced over the next 12 to 18 months. So we're very proud of that technology.
Lawrence Stroll, good luck with your plans, and thanks very much for coming on the show.
It's World Wildlife Day. Now, here in Britain, the number of hazel dormice is declining, and they're critically endangered. But conservationists are trying to restore their ancient woodland habitats. Kitty Logan is on the mouse trail.
Winter is time for the hazel dormouse to hibernate. This tiny creature can sleep for up to 7 months a year. But the native UK species is increasingly scarce. The People's Trust for Endangered Species monitors its numbers.
But what we do know from the monitoring programme we've been running for the last 30 years is that dormouse numbers have declined by 51% in the UK since the year 2000. So we've lost half our dormouse population in the last 20 years.
Hazel dormice prefer ancient woodlands with plenty of dense undergrowth and low-hanging branches to climb. They feed on hazelnuts, seeds and berries and are mostly found in southern England. Their numbers are rising in Devon thanks to efforts by the Woodland Trust to recreate their favourite habitat.
We can see how, as we slowly remove the conifer and scrub develops and a more native structure begins to emerge, the dormice start to actually move into those areas and extend not only their range but also their population.
Hazel dormice usually breed just once a year, producing 4 to 5 young. Conservationists put up nesting boxes to encourage reproduction, and they've also successfully tried to reintroduce dormice to new areas. But the dormouse still faces several challenges, including climate change.
This is a species that hibernate over winter. If we move into a time where our winter temperatures become more variable, they can wake up and they can die over winter. And also, if it's wet in spring and summer, that inhibits their breeding.
Hazel dormice hate open spaces, so they can't expand around the countryside without hedgerows. But what they need most is the sanctuary of these silent woods and traditional forestry methods which allow light through to help scrubland grow. Birds and insects benefit from these ancient woodlands too.
They sustain a very large, diverse range of species. So ancient woodlands are probably the most diverse in terms of species of all the kind of terrestrial habitats we have in the UK.
This snoozing dormouse will wake soon in spring, but its future depends on keeping woodlands as they once were in the past. Kitty Logan, CGTN, Hampshire.
Is this the world's most sustainable football strip? The second league British team Forest Green is debuting a new look for its players that is made partly from coffee bean leftovers. The side that's putting the green back into football last year designed a kit made out of bamboo. See how it's all done at europe.cgtn.com.
Now, the country music legend Dolly Parton has received her first COVID jab, and she's encouraging others to do the same.
Vaccine, 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 vaccine. I'm begging of you, please don't hesitate. Vaccine.
The star went viral after changing the lyrics to one of her own hits, telling viewers she's old enough and smart enough to get the jab. Last year, she donated $1 million to help fund coronavirus research. She's now been given a shot of the Moderna vaccine, joking on Instagram that she's had a dose of her own medicine. And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're available to watch on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.